So welcome everybody to my masterclass from profession to passion. I'm Vicki and I run a coaching business called Victoria Melius. I'm also a practicing solicitor, and this has been born out of a number of coaching conversations I've had over the past 5 or 6 years with professionals who've decided they want to transition in some way, shape or form and don't know what the steps are to take and don't have the tools to do it. So I've had those conversations and I've taken from those some things that I think are really useful and some of the common threads I see in every one of those conversations into a system which I hope will be helpful. So I'm going to go through a little bit first about my own background and then talk you through my from profession to passion system and the steps along the way. Also talk about what gets in the way of a career transition, a successful career transition, and then have time at the end for a quick wrap up and Q&A. So my career journey, and I don't really love to talk about myself, but this is important insofar as this presentation and the program that it supports has come about from my own personal experience as much as from my coaching journey. And it's because I was in a profession, and I still am in some form, which I found quite traditional, and there was a route involved which most lawyers followed. So I qualified as a solicitor in 2011 following a 2-year training program. And after that, it was always about the next step. So when you've been qualified for a few years, moving up to associate. When you've been associate, looking at senior associate or legal director, and eventually onto partner. And that was considered doing it right, doing it well for a lawyer. But sometime in my journey, and I've been a lawyer for just coming up 12 years now, at some point I realised that I didn't want to be a partner. And I didn't know why, because I still liked my job, but that route just didn't seem to fit me anymore. And around that time, I got quite frustrated with how my professional life was shaping up. And I also knew that there were other things I wanted to explore, and at that time didn't quite know what they were. So I felt stuck and unsatisfied, but not deeply, deeply unhappy. I knew that part of the law was still interesting to me, and I just couldn't figure out why I didn't feel aligned with it anymore. And also within legal, I'm a franchise specialist, a qualified franchise professional, and that is my favourite part of law. And I suppose when I was feeling a bit stuck and not satisfied, I was doing a much broader remit. I was doing general corporate and commercial law as well. And that was really useful. It's really helpful to give me that grounding, but it wasn't what got me out of bed in the morning. And it wasn't what I really looked forward to. So I knew I liked law and I knew I specifically liked franchising, but still I wasn't quite happy with the majority of my work being non-franchising and still feeling like there was something away from law altogether. So I got some really good advice from a partner in my firm to have some coaching. And at that point, I'd never had coaching before. I'd vaguely heard the term, but didn't really know what it meant. And I was introduced to a coach, and I had a session with her, which was, to put it mildly, transformative. I had a fantastic first coaching experience, and I realized there was a lot of stuff that I hadn't quite figured out on my own. And I knew from that very first coaching session that coaching itself had to be part of my own journey as well. And I realized that I did love a lot of the elements of law and my legal career, specifically the franchise bits. But I also now knew that coaching, specifically within that mindset, confidence, motivation, had to be part of my journey as well. So I spent a few years doing an ILM level 7 qualification in executive coaching and mentoring. And after that, that contains a number of practice hours that you do with coachees. I then niched a bit further into career coaching. I still do some broader executive coaching, but I love the career coaching side. And I help senior level professionals who are looking at career transition. That might be promotion or progression, but quite often it's a transition away from their full-time employed legal role or their full-time employed accountancy role, for example. I'm also currently undertaking an emotions coaching practitioner training, which if you told me 5 years ago I was going to do, I wouldn't have believed you. Well, I wouldn't have even known what it was. But actually, it occurred to me that a lot of the steps people take when they're transitioning have a big emotional impact. And that can really get in the way of good decision making and clarity around certain issues. So I'm doing that alongside it. And from my coaching journey, I developed a program which I'm talking to you about today called From Profession to Passion. And the idea here is that I want people to fully enjoy their careers and live their careers in a way that suits them. I'm also a speaker on both legal matters, specifically franchising, and coaching. So some of you might have seen me in the recent coaching summit, the Coaching Crowd Coaching Summit, which happened in July. And this is a follow on from that, where I started to touch on the outline of my system. So this topic, as I said, it was born out of my own experience, but also over the last 5 years, working with a number of senior level professionals, I also find that people don't know how to leave a profession if they want to. And I very much felt this myself because I assumed there'd be a point if I wasn't happy that I would just be leaving law. In the end, I didn't, and I found a way to make it work for me, having both a legal career and a side business. But at the time, I remember thinking, what if I do just give this all up and leave all of this experience and qualification behind to do something different? So I realized there was a need for something which helped someone through that process. And it's useful for people that know they want to make a change and might even know where they want to go. It's also useful because of the way I've designed the steps of this system for someone who knows they want something different, but really otherwise doesn't have a clue what that might be. And it's really predicated upon the thought behind this quote, that it is never too late to be what you might have been. And I was coaching someone in their early 50s a few months ago who said, but I've been doing this for nearly 30 years. Isn't it too late to change now? And actually, we talked about it. And during that coaching session, it became clear that there were so many other options available because they had that huge experience that 30 years in a profession can give them. And it's not to say they have to use all of that day-to-day experience all the time, but the breadth of experience, the skills, and the responsibility they've had will apply brilliantly to something else. And now they're looking at what they really want to do, and it's becoming much clearer. So my From Profession to Passion system, trademarked beautifully because I am a lawyer, uses the PASSION of passion as my 7-step system. Each one of the steps is crucial and important, but it's really about how it all fits together so that you can make a really confident and informed choice. So the starting point for me has been purpose. And often when I talk to people about career change, particularly intelligent and driven senior level professionals, they say, well, what does this really have to do with career change? I know I'm not happy. I know I want to do something else. Why should I look at my purpose and my core values? You'd be surprised how often I hear that actually. But unless we know what's really important to us and what we are at our very core, it's hard to make decisions that align with that. So I've created this as the first step because it's actually really important, and it can be a little bit uncomfortable, but figuring out what your inspirations and motivations and core values are will make everything else easier. I find a lot of people struggle to make decisions and procrastinate when they don't know what's important to them and what's not. The second step of the system is assess, and this is looking at the current situation as it is now, what you enjoy about your role, which sometimes can be hard to find if someone is frustrated or stuck and they know what's wrong with their situation. They might struggle to identify what they love about their current role, but there will be some things in there, or at least there will have been things in their role that they did enjoy, really pulling those out and focusing on those, and also what they would like to change because they're likely coming to me for a reason. And if finding out what it actually is underlying about that situation they'd like to change is important. And it's also looking at the wider assessment of your life. Career is one part of it. It might be a very big part of it, but it's not the only aspect. What else is going on with family, home, and finances, so that we find out how important career is in amongst that much wider picture of life. Then onto skills. This is everything that you're skilled at, but it's particularly focused on what people are great at and what they'd like to improve. Sometimes people don't go for a promotion or a progression opportunity because they think they don't have a particular skill required at that level. However, when they look at it and find out what the skill gap is, it might be a good deal smaller, or it could be easily remediable. Then, after the first three sections, which are actually the quite meaty sections, and once we've got that information from purpose, assess, and skills, we can start to create a personal blueprint to navigate our way through career transition. And doing this work at the beginning, it might seem like it's doing um, deeper underlying work, and it is. But doing that and having the right foundation to move forward is crucial because, again, it makes those decisions easier and it helps during that process to give you ideas and options, particularly for those that haven't really got a clue what they want to do next. The fifth step is information. This is identifying what information you need, what resources you might need, any training, and any support in order to move forward. Some people know this really quickly, it doesn't take very long. Others need to find out because they don't know what they don't know. And that is, it's all part of the process. And no two career transition journeys for me have looked the same. So whilst each of these steps in turn is useful, some of them take longer than others, and that's okay. Some of them you can whiz through, and some of them people get a bit stuck on and need a bit of guidance. But each of them is important in its own right. Moving on to then options. So once we've done all the underlying work and we've got the blueprint and the information we need, what are the options to move forward and what suits you best? And that's something I'll come on to a little bit later when I talk about options in more detail. But someone once described it on a podcast as popcorn thinking. Often once you start thinking about something, you come up with lots and lots and lots of ideas, and it's a bit like popcorn, it just keeps going. And because the rate of momentum seems to increase as the popcorn pops, you end up with this big bowl full of popcorn, and it's harder to distinguish between the ideas, so it can get a bit muddled. And what I like about this is actually saying there are lots of ideas, not all of those ideas are created equal. So which ones of those are the really important key options that will be a really useful starting point to explore for moving forward? And then the next steps, which is actually determining a plan to keep yourself motivated, to keep yourself accountable, and to move forward with a degree of clarity and hopefully a time frame. So looking at each of them individually, and for those of you that saw me at the coaching summit, you'll have got this far with me already and you'll have had a look at purpose, which is the first of these steps. But indulge me again and just have a look at this because there is a reason I start with it. So figuring out your core values, what drives you and what motivates you, what gets you out of bed in the morning, understanding it properly and engaging with it so that you're living it in everything you do, because those core values will be relevant in your personal relationships, in the way you raise your children, in the way you greet your colleagues at work, in the way you deliver services to customers or clients. All the way through, those core values will be there. And if you're not aware of them, it can be hard to work out why things aren't aligning properly. But if you know what's really important to you, you'll know why something doesn't fit right, and you'll be able to deal with it. Looking also within purpose at what fulfillment looks like to you, what makes you truly happy, what energizes you and motivates you. Really, really important, I think, for getting the best out of your life. Because if we don't start with what makes us truly happy and what brings us the most joy, it's going to be very hard to create that in our working roles. And importantly, interests. When I did my own career transition coaching many years ago now, I remember being asked to write a list of all of my interests. And I thought, well, that'll only take me a few seconds. And I started scribbling notes, and it actually went on, covered a whole page. I had lots of things that I was interested in, only very few of which I was doing on a daily or weekly basis because of how much work had taken over and how little of work had been actually my core love within my legal work, which was franchising. So I had a lot more interests there than I was regularly doing. And it was important for me to see that because I realized how much else I could be doing that brought joy to my life. So now my mission has been to create a life where I cover most of my interests a lot of the time. You might have an interest in travel that you only want to do once or twice a year, but you still want for that the planning, the money, and the ability, the freedom and the flexibility to do that when you do want to. Or you might have an interest which you can do weekly or monthly. And unless you know what it is and actually factor in the time to do it, it's hard to make your life look like you really want it to. So then moving on to assess. So the current situation, as I mentioned, that's everything on the broader scale: family, finances, work, etc. Working out why someone's unsatisfied and what's not bringing them joy. It might be bigger than work, or work might be the driver of that dissatisfaction that is leaking into home life as well. So I frequently hear, I just have terrible days at work, not even sure why, but then I go home and shout at my husband about it or grumble to my wife about it. And then I'm toxic for that first hour that I get into home. And they don't want to bring that home to their spouse and their families. But if you're unhappy at work longer term and you're doing work every day, that's likely to bleed over. So looking at where that dissatisfaction is coming from, what there's too much of or not enough of, not enough of in your work is helpful too. And like I said, focusing on things that you enjoy. It can be harder to look at that if you're in a position of wanting change, but it is really important because otherwise you don't know what you're looking for. You only know what you're looking to get away from, and that's quite important. And if you could design an ideal career, even if you don't know what the actual output will be, what the service or a product you might deliver is, what does an ideal career look like to you? How does it feel different to what you've got now? How much freedom and flexibility do you want? What kind of income do you want? What kind of autonomy do you want? Thinking about what would be ideal is a really useful exercise here because the more we can focus on what we do want, the easier it will be to design that life for ourselves. So, skills. As I said, it's useful to list all skills and to have people who know and love you comment on these as well. Really, really useful. But also look at your professional qualifications and experiences. And that's not just the degree you took or the masters you had. It's all the experiences that have come along with your career, which might be managing people, even if you didn't do a specific course in that. It might be dealing with difficult customers. It might be managing different expectations. It might be delegating and monitoring or mentoring juniors in your team. Put all of those down, and I would also mark which ones of those skills you really like using on a daily basis. And also add in your hobbies, even if they're not related to your work. Those hobbies may well have skills associated with them that you have in abundance, and you still learn those and develop those over time. So put those into and see if there are any other skills that come from those. And what do you want to develop or need to develop? Again, if you're looking at a career shift into a different industry, you might need industry experience, you might want some work experience, you might need to take a course of training or a new qualification. So looking at what you might need, particularly if you're really keen on a certain industry or a certain job, is useful. And thinking about what makes you or what would make your day easier, what are you curious about? And what else you could do with your skills. Because I remember thinking, I'm a lawyer, that's what I'm trained to do. And I didn't think I'd necessarily be good at anything else. But what I realized was my skills of listening to clients, taking information from clients and asking insightful questions, as a lawyer to draft agreements or to draft witness statements, is still very similar to when I speak to coaching clients. And they provide me with information and I ask questions, insightful questions to get them thinking and to get more information from them then. It's the same skill, it's just used in a different way. So think about what else you might be able to do with your skills, or what people with a similar skill set to you have also done. Then with structure, the second S in the system, I really want people to consolidate what they've learned in the first three steps, the first PAS of the seven-step program, because there is a lot there that will have come up, and actually joining it all together and seeing it as a bigger picture rather than just a very detailed look at that one area will start to form connections, and things will arise that you might not have thought of as you go through that process. So the structure now is to take all of that and to actually start planning it out as if you were going to build your dream house. You'd start with the foundation, having the overall plan and the bigger, wider picture, really, really useful. And consider the aspects of your career. How much income do you need to earn so that you can have the life you want? It might be less than you're currently earning, and that that might sound strange, and a lot of people don't want to earn less. But actually, when they look at really what they want out of life is more freedom. They want to work 4 days a week rather than five, or they want to work 3 days a week or 2 days a week rather than five. They may be happy to sacrifice some of the income in order to have the flexibility, because it really depends on what's important to you. Support. Who will help and support you? Is it your family, your partner, parents, siblings, or a wider network of colleagues? When I first started in coaching, I honestly assumed I was the only one, apart from my coach supervisor, that was really coaching. And I didn't know there was this fantastic community of coaches, who I now have a wonderful relationship with, and who I've collaborated with, and who support me and I support them on a daily basis. There is possibly a whole network out there just waiting for you to support you. But what do you need, and who's going to be there? And what connections do you have already? And actually, I know a lot of people who have fantastic connections. So if I'm looking for someone in a particular industry, I might reach out to two or three people that I know are very well connected and say, do you know someone in this sector who could help get me some experience? And they will inevitably say, yes, absolutely, and put me in touch. So looking at your network, identifying training needs, we talked about this, particularly if it's an industry or a job shift. And what your plan is for transition. It's probably not going to happen overnight at senior level. Typically, it takes a few months. So working out what's going to happen during that time to keep you on track and to keep you accountable. That's what the blueprint's all about. So information, I'm going to whiz through this quite quickly because I think it's self-explanatory, and it's hard to really flesh this out unless you've done the other steps in the program and know therefore what you're looking for. But think about the information, support, and resources you want to move forward. And I actually mentioned it on the previous slide, that network and the connections you have and how they might be able to support you with that transition and with the information you need. And options. Now, I'm actually going to start at the end of this slide with a quote from my dad, who, if anyone knows me, my dad's one of my very favourite people, and he often comes up with a real gem. And this came from when I was quite young. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and we were going on a road trip somewhere. And my mother has many skills, but map reading isn't one of them. So my father decided it was crucial that I knew how to read a traditional paper map, to how to unfold it, read it, and fold it back properly. That was a big part of my map training. And before we got in the car, he said, "Come along, Vicky, I'm going to talk to you about this map and where we're going." And this is well before sat navs, certainly before Google Maps. And we poured over this AA route map, and Dad said, "Okay, we're here. This is point A, and we're going to go here, which is point B. So how do we think we're going to get there?" And he started explaining the route he was planning to take. And I said, "Oh, but there's this road that also goes between A and B." And he said, "Absolutely. There's rarely only one way to get somewhere. If you've got a destination in mind, there might be different ways to get there, and some of them might suit you better at different times." Reviewing the information that you've got so far from the previous steps in the system, and what has come up for you, really, really important, because some things might have come up that are worth further investigation. And if something feels right to you, The way to get there is what we do in this step, and there might be 2 or 3 options about how to get there. Conversely, if you haven't quite narrowed it down by this point and don't know still which way you want to go, there might be 2 or 3 really good viable options. This is when we look at the pros and cons of each option and look at what's right for you now and why that is. And typically that will go right back to the beginning and link to that purpose, the real core values and drivers you have. So, in this as well, it's an important thing to brainstorm by yourself, to look at it with a coach or mentor if you've got one, and to ask people whose opinions you trust and respect. And sometimes people criticize me for saying that. I mean, it is a personal journey. And I think importantly, knowing what you want is crucial. But someone else might see something for you that you haven't seen yourself. And I think having that collaborative effort with people that you love and respect is helpful. And then finally, this last step, which is called next steps, can only be done once you've considered the others. But you've gone all the way through, right the way to options, and you've figured out now where you want to go. Following the program has got you to this point, and it's now important to work out how we're going to go from having the goal, the option in mind, and actually getting there. So often, again, this happens in stages, sometimes over several months. So making sure you know what those stages are and the steps are, often done alongside a current role that you're still working in. Really, really good to have this plan in place now and to do the work on your mindset to make sure you know why you're doing it, why it's now, and to really get comfortable with the fact you want this change, because change can be unsettling and it's really easy to think, oh, it's feeling very uncomfortable. Maybe I'll just go back a step and I'll think about the options some more. So that's why I've actually put this in as the final step, because I want people to get to the point that they are happy to commit to that change, which they know is going to be positive. And it can be hard to do that without the right support, without having done the inner work and figuring out your purpose and your drivers, and without having that clear assessment of where you are now and what you need. But you've done the work, which has given you put you into the position now to make the change you've been looking at making. So, this is not the time to to be terrified about it, but it is the time to make some plans that suit you and to get the support you need to move forward. So that's the From Profession to Passion system that I've created, which, like I said, it's been tailored over time because I've noticed that these steps do come up for everyone at some point, and some of them, as I said, take longer than others. But I think it's really useful to go through it all and to have an overview of the big picture, see how that really sits with you. And this is just a quick final slide before I summarize about what can get in the way and what can go wrong, because I see all of these come up for different people at different times, and I recognize at least 6 of them from my own journey on this list. Perfectionism is number 1 for me because it was my challenge personally. I thought as soon as I get my ducks in a row, then I'll do X. But the tragedy is that the ducks kept wandering off in different directions and I rarely got them all into that row together. So I kept procrastinating and putting things off. It took me longer than I'd have liked to make those decisions. It led to overthinking, which in turn led to anxiety. There was a lot that went through my mind with that transition. And what I was missing was this sort of system that I've now created. And I know I couldn't have got to creating the system without the journey I went on. However, it would have been really useful to know this right back at the start. So looking at things that might get in the way, it's not as negative as it sounds. It's actually for an empowering reason. It's to say these things could well crop up because big change in any aspect of life can be uncomfortable and there can be hurdles to overcome. So if we know what they are or what they could be, then if one of them creeps in, if there's some imposter syndrome or some fear of failure, we can look at that and say, well, we knew that might come up. and we've got a plan to deal with it, or this is where we get the support to deal with it. So that's really all I wanted to cover today on this from profession to passion system. I wanted to just go through it and make sure it was clear and understandable for people, and there was something that people could look back on if they're going through that sort of journey themselves, or if they suspect they might be in the next 12 months or so. Having that as a starting point, I hope, will be useful. But bear in mind, it's not a one size fits all. And whilst those questions are on each of the slides of the steps of the system are useful, they're not the only questions that might be relevant for you there. So use them as a starting point, but do take each step in turn and figure out what it means to you and how important it is to go through that process. And look at the resources you might need in getting the right support, whether that's coaching or whether that's other resources you might want first, books or TED Talks or conversations with people who are doing what you want to do. You know, the more information you can have and the more comfortable you can be with where you're going, the better for this process. But if you get stuck, don't worry, there are people out there who have done it and who want to help. So I'll put my details up there. I'm sure anyone who's come along tonight will know how to get hold of me, but just in case, those are there for you. And there is just one final slide I will share with you, which is a bit of a treat for this masterclass. I wanted to create a program where I could use my From Profession to Passion system with more people and at a lower investment than my one-to-one coaching is. So I've created the From Profession to Passion Foundation course. This will go live in December this year, and it will include recorded trainings from me on each of the steps, which people can study at their own pace, along with workbooks, resources, and a 30-minute coaching conversation with me. The reason I've done this is because I think it will provide a lot of content. It won't have that one-to-one element all the way through it, but someone can use that 30-minute coaching conversation on any of the steps they choose. Importantly as well, I wanted to create something that could fit around a busy professional's life, taking into account work and personal commitments. So if someone wants to study 3 of the modules in one go or in 1 week, they can do, but then leave it for a month and come to the next one, that's fine. It's not a commitment that you have to do it week on week in order to fulfill the program. It's very much learning at your pace in a way that suits you. So some people might take a week off, and when they have that week off, they can do this as part of their time away from work, or they might do a little bit on lunchtimes or breaks when it suits them. But it is designed to be learned at your pace, and you can then pause and give yourself a chance to reflect on each of the steps within the program I've created. The standard price for this program on my website is £397. However, there is a £150 discount to £249 for the first 10 subscribers based on this masterclass. So if you'd like to pre-order, ready for the live date in December, please email me at vicky@victoriamelius.com. So that's all I wanted to say today. Thank you so much for joining me live, for those of you who could make it, and for those that watch the recording in your own time. I hope it's been of value. But please do get in touch with me and let me know if you have any queries. And I look forward to seeing you very soon.